Recording. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Please stand for the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. So first thing on our agenda this evening is a presentation by our representatives from MJ Engineering, Jackie and Nora. And before they start, I would just like to thank our Waterfront Advisory Committee for working on this for almost 2 years, devoting a great deal of time, especially Patty Schaefer, who was the chairperson, also Jen Messiano, who was our grant writer and participated, and our staff, Brad Hammond and Liz also participated. I see Jim Badzik here, who was at a lot of the meeting, so, and I can't see.
Dawn.
Oh, Dawn, yes. Several people gave a lot of input to this. And especially there's one person who's not here that did a lot of work on that, and that's Maria Moore. So I would like to thank all those people in advance. And we have the presentation. Enjoy.
Great. Thank you, Mayor, and congratulations. And I also want to take the opportunity to thank you. You were very much a part of a lot of the work that went into this as well. Good evening, everybody. I'm Jackie Hicks with MJ Engineering. We were the consultant, the lead consultant that was brought on board to help facilitate this process with the village and the Department of State through the local waterfront revitalization program. I do need to give a shout out to the Department of State since they are the funding agency, so you can tell Barbara I did that. Barbara Kendall is the Department of State representative that we worked with through this effort. And it's great to see some committee members in person. I know we had a lot of Zoom meetings over the course of the last 2 years working through this effort. Joining me today is Nora Culhane-Friedel, who is a planner that has also been working on this effort. So what we have today, and I do recognize you have a very full agenda this evening. So I am going to move fairly quickly through this information. You did receive this information last week. Hopefully you've had a chance, hopefully, to take a look at it and get familiar with it. I am going to hit on some key elements here, but again, I'm going to move fairly quickly. But if you have any questions, please feel free. That's why we're here. We're happy to help address them. So first, I'd like to do a brief overview of the Local Waterfront Revitalization Program. So that's the LWRP. You're going to hear me say that acronym quite a bit over the next few minutes. So I'm going to talk very briefly about what is an LWRP, what the benefits are to the village of being a part of this program. I'm going to talk about the planning process and then ultimately implementing your Local Waterfront Revitalization Program. In terms of what an LWRP is, it is a land and water use plan. It ultimately is a comprehensive strategy to implement the policies and the projects that are identified through this effort. It addresses any type of development. It might address waterfront access. It might address protecting natural and cultural resources, as well as things like erosion and flooding. In terms of benefits of being a part of the Local Waterfront Revitalization Program and going through this process and this effort, it allows you to perhaps attract appropriate development if that is something you're wishing to do. It works to protect the waterfront and other important resources in your community, first by identifying those and then identifying how to protect those. One of the key benefits of having an adopted local waterfront revitalization program is that it opens up doors for future funding to be able to implement. It's a really key piece of this for the village. It is an opportunity to establish consensus throughout the village and create long-term partnerships. And it ultimately provides a comprehensive framework for your decision-making as it relates to your waterfront revitalization area. In addition, any actions by state and federal agencies, permitting, funding, et cetera, must be consistent with what you have outlined in your local waterfront revitalization plan. So you basically get a seat at the table, so to speak, when these actions are happening. The process first established a waterfront advisory committee. There was a very active waterfront advisory committee. We had regular meetings. The committee members took an active role in reviewing various components, talking about projects. Um, we looked at various planning projects that had already been underway and initiatives that the village has already undertaken and what that means. There is in a section of, and I'm going to go through the sections in a moment, in one section of the LWRP, a pretty, I'm going to say pretty comprehensive and existing conditions analysis of what you have here, as well as some opportunities and challenges associated with your existing conditions. And then ultimately, this preliminary draft that the village board has in front of them is the draft that is also gone to the Department of State so they can begin their formal review of this draft that so many people put a lot of time and effort in. I want to point out, some people in terms of reviewing, and I'm looking at the mayor as well as former Mayor Moore and Jen sat down with us line by line in some instances to make sure it reflected what you needed here in the village. And that was much appreciated, I will say. And I'm going to go through what the next steps are in terms of the review process at the end. But in addition to the planning process with the village and the Waterfront Advisory Committee, there's also a process at the state level. So there is state review. There's something called a 60-day public review where there are various state agencies that review and comment. And then ultimately, this board would be, asked to accept and ultimately adopt this document. Once that happens, the Secretary of State would review and consider adopting the document, and then it goes to the federal level for adoption as well. And that ensures that at each level, they're signing on to the consistency of any of their actions with what you are looking for here in the village. So implementing. It could be anything from capital projects like bricks and mortar, construction projects, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. It could be additional studies and plans, further exploration and evaluation that might be needed to be able to get to those capital projects. Again, as I mentioned, this allows you the opportunity to apply for future grants. It allows you to be able to evaluate local actions in consistency with your local waterfront revitalization plan, and that's something called your local consistency law. And ultimately, we hope it would be an ongoing process, every few years, take a look to see what's working. So there are several required elements of this program within this document. And I think I'm probably going to move through this piece really quickly. I don't want to bore everybody, but these are required in the program. And while on the left of your screen, it might seem very linear in terms of these components, they're all very interrelated and interconnected. And for the Waterfront Advisory Committee and those from the village that participated in the development of this document, you can see as we made edits and changes to one section, another section needed to be taken another look at to ensure everything made sense. And as we learned one thing, we had to look back and see what does that mean for this other element in the plan. So it's kind of a circular nature going through the development of this. But the required elements first include a identification of your revitalization boundary. So your waterfront revitalization area, otherwise called your WRA, lots of acronyms in the program, a complete inventory and analysis, an identification of the local waterfront revitalization policies. There are 44 state coastal policies. All 44 policies must be included, but there are opportunities to refine and make some of those policies more specific to the village as appropriate. Proposed land and water uses and proposed projects. That's the section that most people get excited about because those are the projects. Those are the things that you will hopefully see in the future in your community. Techniques for local implementation. So that talks a little bit about what you already have in place to be able to address some of these coastal policies and implement some of this. Federal and state actions and programs to affect implementation. That's kind of the boring section. There are certain actions that will affect the implementation, and that is identified. And honestly, that section is provided by the state to include in. Local commitment and consultation. This talks about the process that was used to develop this plan, and then seeker compliance, the State Environmental Quality Review Act. So I'm just going to hit a couple of things here. We did go into some detail in what we provided to you about each section. What I do want to share with you, pardon me, is that the revitalization area is the entire village. And there was a lot of discussion about that with the committee, the benefits of that, some of the concerns. Ultimately, it was decided by the committee to have the entire village included because that allows the entire village and actions within the entire village to be eligible for funding. So that was an important piece I wanted to highlight. The inventory, everything from natural resources, transportation, parks. I talked about the policies. I'm going to talk about the projects in a moment. Pardon me. Yeah. Oh, that's great. Thank you so much for giving up your water. I left mine in the car. We talked about techniques for local implementation. The one thing I want to point out here is your local consistency review. Pardon me. As part of the adoption, when you get to that point as a board, you will be required to adopt a local consistency law, which basically says if somebody wants to do certain things, and that's outlined in the law, the village just needs to take a look and make sure that it's consistent with your LWRP. For anyone that's familiar going through the seeker process, there's a checklist of items. That's how that process generally works. And I do want to thank Brad. I know that he has put in some effort and some thoughts about how that might function. I did want to highlight through this process, there was public engagement. There's a project website, an online survey. We had stakeholder group meetings. We had 2 public meetings and a projects questionnaire, and we appreciate everybody taking the opportunity to participate. Here's the boundary. We talked about that. I am going to talk through the projects just a little bit and then open it up for questions, if that's okay.
Sounds good. Yep.
Right. So the proposed land and water uses and projects are intended to help implement what has been discussed through your local waterfront revitalization plan. And as I said, they could be bricks and mortar, they could be studies. It really depended on what the village needed. But I do want to point out that all of the projects must be located wholly within the village. We had a lot of conversation about some things that might be connecting outside of the village, which is important, but for the purposes of this program, the projects did need to remain within the village boundaries. So the projects, working with the committee, were kind of categorized into connectivity and access, water quality, and coastal resiliency and habitat protection. And so you can see to the side there, but we had several projects under connectivity and access. And these were based on input received from the public, the online survey, as well as the WAC discussions. So the connectivity and access, these are the projects identified. So a feasibility study for bike connections, looking at developing the village-owned properties on Dune Road, create the Moneybog State Title Wetlands Boardwalk, continue with the improvements to the south parking lot, create a waterfront story walk, implement canal improvements, and implement improvements to the village marina, and street end activation. So there are several street ends in the village that there were discussions about, could we create these into small recreational areas or improved access to the water there. Here are just some quick examples. There are concept plans that are included. There are proposed cost estimates that are included for each of the projects, all aimed toward trying to set up the village to be able to go after additional funding. So I'm going to work through this. From the water quality side, the proposed projects are to prepare a stormwater management plan village-wide and look at aligning your zoning ordinance with state and federal regulations. From a watershed management plan perspective, looking at a broader watershed area and looking at any upland management techniques to improve water quality, looking at upgrades to green infrastructure, and also doing routine water quality monitoring. from a coastal resiliency and habitat perspective, building on partnerships that you already have, looking at implementing a shoreline protection monitoring program, and preparing an ecological and resiliency study of the bay. I went into detail there. So that is a very quick synopsis. You probably didn't think it was that quick, but there was a lot of work that went into this. The village put forth a significant amount of work, whether it's through the volunteers, the Waterfront Advisory Committee, or those sitting around the table going line by line. And we are at a really exciting point at this time in terms of next steps. So this preliminary draft has been submitted not only to the village, but to the Department of State. At this point in time, the Department of State has started their formal review. So while our Department of State representative has been providing comments all along the way, it's now going to New York State DOS legal review, as well as their coastal consistency program review. The Department of State will provide comments back to us. If you have comments, provide them back to us. There will be a revised draft. It will be the complete draft. And once the Department of State is comfortable with that draft, that it meets the program elements that are required, they will ask you as a village board to consider conducting a seeker, as well as accepting the local waterfront revitalization plan as complete. And that kicks off that 60-day review where other state agencies will review that. And then there will be a response to comments and a final version of the LWRP, and the Department of State works with the village through that effort. And then ultimately the village board will adopt, then hopefully the Secretary of State will adopt, and it'll move on to the federal level. So those are the next steps, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Well, I did have one particular question. The harbor management plan is required,
Yes.
and I was looking through and there were no stipulations as to what that consisted of, just that it has to exist. And I'm wondering if the things that we currently have in place, we currently have a dock master, we currently have vessel speed limits, no wake zones, we currently have slip assignments and those kinds of things. Are those the kinds of things that are included in a harbor management plan, or is there something else we should be looking to do?
No, that is more than sufficient. And what has been done with this preliminary draft, and we can certainly add to that the next draft, is that the harbor management plan elements have been integrated in. It won't be a standalone document. It's been integrated into various chapters, and there's a table that identifies how those elements of a harbor management plan are integrated in. And that is a perfectly acceptable way to address the harbor management components. We talked through that with Barbara Kendall from DOS, and she made sure to walk us through which sections and how we needed to integrate that in. We thought that it would be easier to have it integrated together versus having a separate document for the village. So everything is in one spot, basically. So if there are other elements that you identify, let us know. Yeah. Yes.
With Village Marina, I see that it's listed in there as a proposed project. Where do we wind up with that in terms of design concepts? Any specifics or?
Yes, pardon me. Yes, there is a concept in the section 4 to help it narrow down from the 100+ page document. Take a look at section 4. I know it's a lot.
Okay.
So there's a project profile for each of the proposed projects that has detail about the project for some of the boardwalk areas and the Dune Road improvements, as well as the marina. There are concept plans that have been developed. However, there will need to be, once you want to, find the funding and want to advance that, full design, public process, as well as engineering at that point to make sure what is being proposed is feasible and is appropriate for what you need there. The concepts were a way to identify some of the key components that we had heard that the village wanted. It also was a way for us to put together some preliminary cost estimates to have an idea of what some of those components might cost, so you can seek funding for that.
Great, thanks.
Sure. Yeah.
how do you feel that we are within the process? It, does the state seem to be receptive to what we're doing, or?
I think so. I hope so. Through this process, Barbara Kendall, our Department of State representative, has been very engaged. And we do have a lot of interaction with her. I was talking with her last week. Um, so she has seen all of these sections in draft form previously and commented on those as well. Now it's moving into the next level. She felt it was time to be moving this to the next
So
level.
in we're in the process, a normal process of going through that.
Yes, yes. This process, it's not a quick
I know
process.
it's not a quick process, I know that.
And
I would never ask you how long you think it would take.
at this point, yeah, I would not be able to answer that because it is at the
Expect
state,
you to, because
it's at the state level.
there's certain things that you can't control.
I
And the
can
state of
try
New
to
York
do
is
it.
very quick about everything that they do.
But we did have, fortunately, Barbara was involved in a lot of our Zoom calls and she was very helpful. And we've heard that she got a promotion and I just asked if she's gonna be sticking with our project and the good news is she is. And hopefully that'll facilitate that.
That'll make things a lot, because I know that happens a lot of times in the state. I've dealt with them and other things. And all of a sudden you're dealing with somebody, and then they're gone,
Yes.
and then you have to start all over again.
Well, I will say in talking with Barbara to make sure I was on target with the next steps as I thought they were according to the guidance of the program. She did indicate when we were talking through that when you got to the 60-day review, she's like, I'll take care of that. That's her responsibility and the notifications that need to happen and the distribution of materials. She's like, I'll document. Uh, she is clearly involved and anticipating that she will remain involved through this.
That's the good thing.
That'll be a big help.
Yeah. Yeah. Other questions?
And anyone else from the board? Questions? Anyone else from the public have a question or a comment?
But, uh, First of all, this is great. I think we all are looking forward to this. My name is Tom Schmidt. I live on Exchange Place, been a resident for a long time. Uh, Apologies if I missed this or misunderstood. The proposal you have, does that have suggestions for areas of improvement, or is that later in the process where we can all be involved and highlight or suggest areas for, whether it's wetland improvements or protection of the bays or other things?
So a lot of this is already mapped out, and it has been from public input that we've gotten over the last 2 years, from online surveys, some public meetings, as well as input from the Waterfront Advisory Committee. And so to a certain extent, a lot of these that are more fleshed out are included in the proposed document and in the draft document. But within those, depending on the level of what had been able to be fleshed out through this, there might be additional studies that are needed to evaluate further. And those studies may very well need to have additional public input.
And is the public able to see that document, or that's later in the process?
Later in the process,
Which is fair.
it needs to, quite honestly, go through this review with the Department of State to make sure, from their legal standpoint, from their coastal consistency standpoint, that it has all of the required components of the program. And at that point in time, we don't want to have that out for,
Makes sense.
yeah.
Specific areas are mentioned and targeted, like Pond Point, Exchange Place, the end of Oneck Road. Those kinds of targeted areas are specifically mentioned as being in need of attention. So they are in the plan.
But no final designs.
No,
No,
well,
not
we
at
have
this
to
point.
hire, that's the next step would be for us. Actually, we have engaged a consultant already to come up with a proposal for designing some mitigation features for some of these areas. And Exchange Place is one of those areas.
Thank you.
So we're a little ahead of the game on the consultant, but we're just getting his proposal first and hopefully things will dovetail together and we can get moving on some of this.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the water as well.
Okay.
It's a pleasure to see everybody.
All right.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you very much. And safe drive back to Albany.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is a public hearing for local law number 1. I need a motion to open the public hearing.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Um, Mr. Angel, would you give a brief explanation of this local law?
Yeah, what it is, actually sort of summarize it in the preamble to the resolution. It's a local law to add a particular article to our real property tax code chapter that gives the village the right to buy the properties that owe taxes. Um, Right now, if somebody doesn't pay their real property taxes, they put it to auction and the properties are bought basically for the unpaid taxes and interest that's due on it by people in the public who then hold it. And ultimately, if people don't pay for several years, they have the power to foreclose it and acquire the property. That's sort of a antiquated way of doing it, I think. And what the village wants to do is it wants to be able to be the purchaser of those unpaid taxes rather than have it a bunch of private individuals. And that's what the county does generally, and that's what a lot of the local villages do. So without this law, we did not have that power. That's all it does.
And now it's an option. It's not that we have to buy all of them.
No, it's an option, but the reality probably is the village would buy all of them, I think. I think that's the idea.
It would
It
more
makes
sen-
sense.
Makes more sense to me for the village to.
Correct.
Yes.
It's all of those obligations, if they're ultimately paid, have to be paid back with interest and penalties. And I remember our former mayor saying, why should a private individual get that interest? Why don't we get that interest? And
Right.
so that's part of it also. Realistically, most of the parcels are not lost. They're paid off after a period of time. And the village would get the interest. And in the weird situation where the property's not saved for unpaid taxes and not paid back, um, and the person doesn't receive it back, the village would be in a position to acquire it.
Where do we purchase these liens or the property, the taxes out of, and where does our interest revenue go to? What
Actually,
account?
we would hold them.
Just
We don't
hold.
have to pay.
So we don't actually have to make the
No, we don't pay the
transaction.
money.
I think the initial concept was that the village was going without this tax revenue. We needed the tax revenue, so we auctioned it off to get the revenue.
Yeah.
Whereas we don't have that many properties that are in arrears, so we can afford to hold on to those properties without having it impact.
It's a paper purchase.
So there's,
Yeah.
so there's no intermediary. It's really just between us and the property owner. There's not a private intermediary.
Yeah, there's no private intermediary, and the village will not have to pay for it because it's due to the village to begin with.
Good.
The village would collect the tax plus interest and have the opportunity to acquire it if the person doesn't redeem it properly.
Makes sense. I just wasn't sure if it was transactional at the beginning or if it's just held.
It's gonna be auctioned technically,
Yeah.
and,
Most of them
And-
always get paid at a closing, because most of the.
Yeah, and,
properties have no
Right.
potential of-
When the property changes hands, then we.
Liz will both offer it and buy it. She's authorized to do both.
King of the castle.
We've designated Liz in this proposed local law as the treasurer to
Nice.
act as the board's agent in acquiring this property.
You need a real estate license for that?
You know,
Okay, any questions from the public, comments from the public? Okay, I guess I need a motion to close the public hearing.
Make a motion, to close the public hearing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Now we move ahead with the resolutions. Mr. Teeman?
Resolved that the minutes of the Board of Trustees meeting of January 4th, 2024 are hereby accepted.
Second,
All in favor?
Aye.
accepted departmental reports. Resolved that the treasurer's report for November and December 2023, Justice Court, Police Departments, and Building Inspectors' reports for December 2023 are hereby accepted.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Resolved that the warrant for February 2024 in the amount of $402,545.55 for the general fund and for $4,396.30 for the capital fund is hereby approved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby authorize the following 2023-2024 budget amendments. GTSC Highway Safety Grant, increase revenue code A4320, $6,000. Increase expense code A3120103, police overtime, $6,000. Stop DWI grant, increase revenue code A30891, $7,500. Increase expense code A3120103.1, $7,500. Insurance recoveries, increase revenue code A2680, $8,001.61. Increase expense code A3120.402, equipment repair, $8,001.61.
Second,
All in favor?
Aye.
authorize budget transfer. Resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby authorizes a budget transfer in the amount of $9,013.81 from GL Revenue Account Code A1589, Other Public Safety Income to GL Expenditure Account Code A3120.103, Police Department Overtime, Personal Services received from the West Hampton Beach School District for the SRO reimbursement for the 2023-2024 school year.
All in favor? Aye.
Resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby approves the renewal of the cybersecurity insurance policy in the amount of $11,805.88 with no increase from the previous year to protect the village from a cyber incident to be funded from A1990 insurance account.
I don't know if everyone knows what's going on in insurance, but that's amazing that it didn't
Didn't go-
increase.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Resolved that the U.S. Power Squadron applied for the use of the Village Marina for the 2024 District 3 Annual District Rendezvous from Friday, July 26, 2024, starting at 5 p.m. through Sunday, July 28, 2024, subject to tent permit, fees, and SLA compliance with music and activities is hereby authorized.
Second,
All in favor?
Aye.
authorize employee to attend courses. Resolved that Jennifer Gaudiello is hereby authorized to attend 2 courses, Governmental Accounting and Accounting Principles and Procedures, through the New York State Office of State Comptroller at a cost of $85 per course from GL Account Code A1325.406, Clerk Office Expense.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Resolved that the Board of Trustees do hereby accept the proposal submitted by Fluid Imagery Computing in the amount not to exceed $8,010 for the Microsoft 365 migration for the village-wide computers to be taken from GL account code A1680.400, data processing contractual.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby accept the proposal submitted by AC Electrical and Lighting Supplies in the amount not to exceed $8,850 for the lighting of the bocce ball courts in the Maria Z. Moore Community Park to be taken from GL account code CM7110 Parks.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And thank you, Vince.
Thank you.
Resolved that the request to the village board to permit the establishment of a grocery store for property located on 141 and 149 Montauk Highway and identified by Suffolk County Tax Map number 905-5-2-6.1 and 6.2 and 7, and 905-5-2-9.1 is hereby referred to the Village Planning Board for review.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby approves the revised 2024, 2025 real property tax exemptions for the 2024-25 tax year as attached.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Resolved that Donald Steinert is hereby appointed to fill the vacancy left by Michael Schermeyer and finish the 5-year term as a member of the Village Planning Board to commence February 1st, 2024 through May 31st, 2028. Happy to read that one.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Welcome aboard, Donald.
Thank you, Donald. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, congratulations.
All for the residents and the board.
Resolved that Cecilia Cunningham is hereby appointed to the Peconic Bay Region Community Housing Fund Advisory Board for a term to end on December 31st, 2024.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Whereas on December 7th, 2023, the Board of Trustees of the Village of West Hampton Beach, the Village, adopted a local law number 15 of 2023, which allows for the creation and administration of affordable housing units within the Village of West Hampton Beach. And whereas in compliance with Section 40-5B1, the Board of Trustees shall set by resolution the maximum monthly rental or initial maximum sales price for an affordable housing dwelling unit and the maximum household income for eligibility for occupancy of said units. And whereas the the trustees have reviewed the attached document entitled Nassau Suffolk Community HUD Family Income Guidelines and Limits effective 2023 to 2024. And whereas the trustees find that the attached document sets forth the appropriate maximum monthly rental or initial maximum sales price for the affordable housing dwelling unit and the maximum household income for eligibility for occupancy of said units in accordance with the village's affordable housing program set forth in Chapter 40 of the Village Code. And now therefore be resolved that the Village Board of Trustees hereby adopts income and rental sales price limits as set forth in the attached document entitled Nassau Suffolk County HUD Family Income Guidelines and Limits effective 2023-2024 as required pursuant to Section 40-5B1.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Resolved that the Board of Trustees Board of Trustees accepts the proposal submitted by Accent Estates Plant Healthcare Company in the amount of $1,715 for one application of insecticide fungicide for the trees on Main Street to be taken from GL account A8560.416 Shade Tree Maintenance.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby authorizes the purchase of one case 590SN backhoe in the amount of $160,799.70 from New York State Contract PC 69383 from Hoffman Equipment as per New York State Department of Transportation. This is fully reimbursable from the Village CHIPS allotment for 2024. And this expenditure to be taken from GL account A5110.2 equipment.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Resolved that Andrew Smith is hereby appointed to the position of temporary fire administrative consultant effective February 1st, 2024, at a rate of $50 per hour up to a maximum of $500 for a period not to exceed 30 days, to be charged against building and zoning account 3620.415, education and training.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Whereas the Village of West Hampton Beach acquired ownership of an historic windmill, the New York State Governor John Adam Dick's windmill, the windmill, and whereas the village has placed the windmill on real property located at 35 Main Street, Village of West Hampton Beach, Suffolk County Tax Map Number 905-11-1-1, commonly known as the Great Lawn, and whereas the Great Lawn is owned jointly by the village and the town of Southampton, the town, and whereas the windmill requires restoration at significant expense, and whereas the village and town entered into an intermunicipal agreement on June 1st, 2023, the IMA, which, among other things, number one, authorized the town to landmark the windmill. Number two, authorized the village to act as a steward of the windmill. And number three, provided that funds from the town's Community Preservation Fund would be used to pay for the restoration to the extent permitted by New York State Town Law, Section 64-E, Southampton Town Code, Chapter 140, and the Town of Southampton's Rules and Regulations for CPF acquisitions and stewardship, as enacted by the Southampton Town Board on January 25th, 2011, by separate agreement between the village and the town, and whereas the village wishes to convey to the town an undivided joint ownership interest in the windmill so that the town is authorized to pay the expenses therefore from the Town of Southampton Community Preservation Fund. Now therefore be it resolved that the village shall transfer to the town an undivided joint ownership interest in the windmill so as to make the town and the village joint owners thereof, that the mayor is authorized to execute all documents reasonably necessary to transfer an undivided joint ownership of the windmill to the town in form approved by the village attorney, that the IMA between the village and the town dated June 1st, 2023 be amended to reflect joint ownership of the windmill, and that the mayor is authorized to execute an amendment to the aforesaid IMA to reflect joint ownership of the windmill in form approved by the village attorney.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Whereas this board has advertised a local law enacting a new Article 9 Village Tax Sales to Chapter 161 Taxation in order to empower the village to bid for and purchase parcels of real property offered for sale at tax sales. And whereas a public hearing was held on February 1st, 2024, and whereas all persons present at the meeting have had an opportunity to speak on behalf or in opposition of the proposed local law, or any part thereof, and now therefore be it resolved that after due deliberation, the Board of Trustees of the Village of West Hampton Beach hereby adopts said local law as local law number 1 of 2024 as advertised and attached, and it be further resolved that the village clerk is hereby directed to enter said local law in the records of the village, and be it further resolved that the village clerk is directed to give due notice of the adoption of said local law to the Secretary of State, and be it further resolved that this local law shall be effective on filing with the New York Secretary of State.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That brings us to the public comment section of the meeting. Does anyone wish to speak? If you do, please come to the podium and address the board. No one? Okay. We do have an executive session, so thank you for coming.
Thank
Good
you.
to see you.
You should-
Congratulations again,
Ralph,
Donald. and
you.
thank you.
Mayor, you should make a motion to executive
I
session.
was just going to do that. Make a motion, we go into executive session to discuss a personnel issues.
Second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oh,